What if everything you thought you knew about how humans first arrived in the Americas was wrong? For decades, the Beringia land bridge has been the undisputed answer, but groundbreaking new archaeological and genetic discoveries are completely upending this theory, revealing a story far more intricate than a single journey. Prepare to have your mind blown as we rewrite the history of an entire continent.
The story of humanity's arrival in the Americas is one of the greatest migrations in the history of our species, a journey not merely of thousands of miles, but of survival, adaptation, and the relentless curiosity that pushes human beings into the unknown. For more than a century, the dominant theory suggested that the first inhabitants of the Americas arrived roughly 13,000 years ago by crossing a corridor between melting glaciers and eventually spreading southward. This narrative, tidy and straightforward, shaped textbooks and museum exhibits for decades. Yet every discovery, every ancient bone, tool fragment, and preserved footprint buried beneath layers of sediment seems to whisper an older story, one that stretches far beyond the late stages of the Ice Age. The key to this unfolding mystery lies in a vanished landmass called Beringia, a bridge of Earth that once connected Siberia to Alaska during the last glacial maximum. Though long submerged beneath the Bering Sea, this prehistoric corridor is now at the center of renewed debate, new evidence, and revolutionary scientific methods that challenge everything we thought we knew about the first Americans. At the height of the Ice Age, around 20,000 years ago, Earth's water was locked within massive glaciers that covered much of northern Europe, Asia, and North America. With so much water frozen, global sea levels plummeted, exposing vast tracts of continental shelf. The most critical of these was a region between modern-day Russia and Alaska, forming a land bridge nearly 1,000 miles wide. Unlike many imagine, Beringia was not simply a narrow strip of land. It was an enormous ecological zone, a mosaic of grasslands, shrub tundra, and patches of boreal forest. It teemed with life, woolly mammoths migrating in herds, steppe bison roaming across windswept plains, and giant bears stalking the edges of river valleys. For thousands of years, humans living in northeastern Asia hunted these animals, adapted to the harsh conditions, and followed them across the landscape. The crossing into the Americas was not a single migration, not an abrupt moment where one group stepped across an invisible threshold. Rather, it was an entire era of movement, settlement, and sometimes long-term residence within the vast expanse of Beringia itself. Archaeologists once imagined Beringia as merely a bridge, an in-between zone that people crossed rapidly on their way to the American continents. But new research paints a very different picture. Beringia was a homeland. Genetic and geological evidence suggests that human populations may have lived in this region for thousands of years, isolated by glaciers to the east and impenetrable tundra to the west. These people were not simply travelers rushing toward new lands. They were adapted, resilient, and innovative, creating tools from bone and ivory, mastering hunting strategies for Ice Age megafauna, and developing cultural traditions that would later spread throughout two continents. This period of prolonged habitation, often called the Beringian standstill, reshaped the understanding of migration patterns. It implies that the ancestors of Native American peoples diverged genetically from their Asian relatives long before entering the Americas. Beringia was not simply the bridge to a new world, it was the cradle of an emerging people.
Meanwhile, climatic changes thousands of miles away set the stage for the eventual dispersal into the Americas. As Earth began to warm, the ice sheets that had once blocked southern movement began to melt, retreating slowly and creating new landscapes, rivers, plains, and gradually opening corridors. But whether the first migrants used an inland route or traveled by water along the Pacific coast remains one of the most debated questions in archaeology today. For decades, the Clovis first theory dominated the scientific narrative. It claimed that the earliest inhabitants of the Americas were associated with distinctive stone tools known as Clovis points, finely crafted spearheads with fluted bases. These artifacts, dated to about 13,000 years ago, were found across large parts of North America. Their widespread presence led researchers to believe that the Clovis people represented the first wave of migration from Asia, moving rapidly across the continents and giving rise to later indigenous cultures. However, troubling pieces of evidence began to emerge. Archaeological sites in South America showed traces of human presence older than the Clovis culture. Footprints found in New Mexico suggested habitation over 20,000 years ago. Stone tools in Texas hinted at technologies predating Clovis craftsmanship. If these findings were correct, then the entire timeline of human arrival needed revision. Gradually, a new picture emerged, one where the first Americans arrived thousands of years before the Clovis people ever shaped their distinctive tools. This shift opened the door to the idea that migration may have begun as early as 25,000 years ago, perhaps even earlier. The more researchers searched the landscape, the more they uncovered evidence that seemed older, more diverse, and less aligned with the once dominant theory. The Americas were not settled in a single wave. They were settled through multiple journeys, spanning vast stretches of time. As this revised timeline gained traction, so too did the importance of Beringia. A once-ignored landscape now became the missing piece in a complex puzzle. Underwater exploration of the Bering Sea, powered by new technologies such as sub-bottom profiling and sediment coring, began revealing ancient riverbeds, lake systems, and potential habitation zones on the submerged land bridge. Although discovering intact archaeological sites beneath hundreds of feet of water is challenging, researchers found tantalizing evidence: charcoal deposits, pollen records, and ancient DNA extracted from sediments that proved Beringia once hosted ecosystems capable of supporting large human populations. Moreover, environmental models reconstructed the climate of this vanished landscape, showing that it offered enough warmth, vegetation, and animal diversity to sustain entire communities for millennia. These discoveries reshaped the broader question from how did humans cross Beringia so quickly to why did humans stay in Beringia for so long?
Parallel to these environmental studies, genetic research opened a new frontier in understanding ancient migrations. Scientists analyzing mitochondrial DNA, Y chromosome markers, and genome-wide data from indigenous populations and ancient remains discovered patterns that aligned with the concept of a long-term Beringian population. The genetic split between Native Americans and East Asians appeared older than previously believed. Moreover, two major branches within Native American lineages, known as Northern and Southern, suggested not one, but multiple phases of expansion from the Beringian region into the Americas. In some ways, genetics offered a map where archaeology had yet to provide concrete traces. It showed that the founding populations were small but diverse, carrying genetic imprints shaped by long periods of isolation. These data indicated that while the ancestors of Native Americans may have originated in Siberia, their cultural and biological distinctiveness emerged in Beringia long before they set foot in the Americas. At the same time, the Pacific coastal migration theory gained new credibility. As ice retreated along the coastline, it created an ecological corridor rich in marine resources: kelp forests, shellfish beds, seals, seabirds, and fish. Such a route would have been ideal for seafaring hunter-gatherers with knowledge of marine environments. Archaeological discoveries on islands along the Pacific Northwest revealed ancient settlements, some dating back more than 14,000 years. Although rising sea levels have submerged many early coastal sites, enough evidence remains to support the idea that the first inhabitants may have traveled by boat or moved along exposed beaches and estuaries. This coastal migration could explain how humans reached South America far earlier than the Clovis first model allowed. It also suggests that technology, adaptability, and maritime knowledge played critical roles in shaping early movements into the Americas. While many parts of the story remain incomplete, the convergence of archaeological, environmental, and genetic evidence points toward a new understanding. The first Americans likely entered the continent long before previously believed, through multiple pathways and with cultural traditions shaped by millennia of life in Beringia. This narrative acknowledges complexity rather than imposing a single linear migration. It embraces the essence of human history: messy, diverse, and far richer than earlier theories allowed. The emerging picture does not diminish the achievements of later cultures such as the Clovis, but instead frames them as part of a much older and broader tapestry. What is most profound about the new evidence is not only how it challenges traditional assumptions, but how it highlights the resilience of early human explorers. These ancient peoples survived some of the harshest climates on Earth.
adapted to environments ranging from Arctic tundra to temperate forests, and carried with them deep knowledge of animal behavior, tool-making, and seasonal cycles. Their migration was not random. It was driven by skill, strategy, and an understanding of the land that modern humans often underestimate. As the Ice Age receded, these groups spread into every corner of the Americas, from the Arctic Circle to the southernmost tip of South America. Over generations, they developed unique cultures, languages, and traditions, shaping the diverse indigenous societies that existed long before European contact.
Beringia, once a forgotten and submerged landmass, now emerges as one of the central stages in this human saga. Its story is written not only in sediments beneath the sea, but also in the memories carried through oral traditions, the genetic signatures preserved in living descendants, and the enduring traces left across the landscape. The new evidence does not simply revise a timeline, it enriches the narrative of how humanity spread across the globe, revealing an epic story of endurance, movement, and discovery. As scholars sift through the growing body of archaeological and genetic discoveries, a clearer image begins to take shape, one that portrays the early human presence in the Americas not as a sudden invasion, but as a gradual unfolding of movement, adaptation, and innovation across a shifting Ice Age landscape. The second phase of this story revolves around what happened once the first migrants began expanding beyond the boundaries of Beringia, dispersing into a continent that was both familiar in its ecological challenges and profoundly alien in its geography. These migrants encountered environments unlike anything in their ancestral homelands: towering ice sheets that carved valleys and redirected rivers, vast plains punctuated by migrating herds, dense forests teeming with new prey, marshlands alive with birds, and coastal regions rich with marine life. The early settlers not only survived within these diverse ecosystems, but thrived, developing technologies, cultural practices, and survival strategies that soon distinguished them from their Beringian ancestors. One of the most fascinating revelations concerns the inland corridors that once channeled movement from Alaska deep into the continent. For decades, researchers envisioned a single ice-free corridor opening between two massive ice sheets, the Laurentide to the east and the Cordilleran to the west, providing a narrow passage through which the Clovis ancestors could migrate southward. But new studies using paleoecological reconstructions reveal that this corridor may not have been biologically viable until long after humans had already appeared in the Americas. Ancient DNA extracted from sediments along the corridor suggests that during its earliest phases it was barren, lacking the plants and animals necessary to support human travelers. This revelation strengthens the coastal migration theory, suggesting that the earliest Americans likely skirted along the Pacific coastline where resources were plentiful and mobility was easier. Yet, the inland corridor story is more complex than once believed. While the earliest migrants may have first moved along the coast, later groups, possibly including the ancestors of the Clovis people, could have used the opening corridor once it became rich with life. By that time, the region would have been flourishing with bison, mammoth, and caribou, creating a natural highway southward. Thus, instead of replacing the coastal theory, the corridor adds another layer to the migration narrative, indicating multiple waves of movement at different times. As a result, researchers no longer speak of a single route or moment of entry, but of a dynamic process shaped by environmental changes, technological abilities, and the shifting needs of human communities.
Meanwhile, a flood of new archaeological sites across North and South America provides critical insight into the earliest inhabitants. In Idaho, at a site known as Cooper's Ferry, tools and burned bone fragments dated to around 16,000 years ago challenge the formally accepted timeline. In Texas, the Galt site reveals layers of stone tools predating the oldest Clovis artifacts. Across Chile, the Monteverde site, long controversial,
has now gained widespread acceptance as evidence of human presence more than 14,500 years ago and possibly much older. These discoveries do not stand alone. When examined together, they paint a pattern of widespread habitations stretching from North America into South America earlier than previously imaginable. Such distribution suggests that the initial migrations occurred far earlier and that travel across the continents must have been surprisingly rapid, perhaps driven by a combination of curiosity, resource exploration, and the social dynamics of hunter-gatherer groups. The possibility of boat-based travel also gains new attention in this context. Ancient peoples of the Pacific Rim, stretching from Japan to Siberia, had long developed watercraft and coastal navigation methods. There is no reason to assume that the Beringian populations were unfamiliar with maritime technology. Indeed, the presence of kelp forest ecosystems along the Pacific coastline would have provided not only food, but also predictable travel routes, calm waters, and natural navigation markers. This kelp highway hypothesis suggests that early migrants could move efficiently along the coast, hunting sea mammals, fishing, and gathering shellfish. Such a route would allow rapid dispersal southward with minimal need to penetrate inland ice-choked landscapes. Once established farther south, these migrants could then venture inland into fertile valleys and plains, following rivers that drained the melting ice sheets. As humans spread throughout the Americas, they encountered megafauna that had roamed the continents for millennia. Giant sloths, saber-toothed cats, mastodons, and glyptodons with armor-like shells. The interactions between humans and these animals have become the subject of intense debate, particularly concerning whether human hunting played a significant role in the extinction of many species. While climate change undoubtedly reshaped ecosystems, the appearance of humans introduced a formidable new predator. Evidence of butchery marks on bones, hunting sites, and the rapid disappearance of megafauna shortly after human arrival raises questions about the role of early settlers in altering continental ecologies. However, most researchers now believe the extinctions resulted from a combination of factors: climatic stress, shrinking habitats, and human pressure. Regardless of the cause, the disappearance of these species forced humans to continually shift their subsistence strategies, adapting to changing landscapes and available prey. Such adaptability is evident in the diversity of tools and technologies developed across the Americas. While Clovis points are iconic, they represent only one tradition among many. Other groups created stemmed points, bone tools, ivory harpoons, and intricate scraping implements. These variations reflect localized needs rather than a single cultural expression. For instance, coastal communities crafted specialized fishing gear, including barbed hooks and net weights, revealing an advanced understanding of marine environments. Mountain groups fashioned tools suited for hunting in rocky terrain, while plains dwellers honed weapons designed for pursuing swift-moving prey. These differences underscore the remarkable ingenuity of early inhabitants and demonstrate that the Americas supported a mosaic of cultures from the very beginning.
One of the most groundbreaking contributions to this new understanding comes from ancient DNA. Even in places where bones have not survived, sediments can preserve microscopic traces of genetic material shed by humans and animals. These environmental DNA samples, extracted from caves, lakebeds, and archaeological layers, reveal patterns of occupation that traditional archaeology might overlook. They show how populations expanded, contracted, and interacted with changing environments. Genetic studies also confirm that early groups diverged into distinct branches soon after entering the continent. Some populations moved along the western coast, spreading rapidly into Central and South America. Others remained in the north, adapting to subarctic environments and developing lifeways refined over thousands of years. Still others spread eastward across the continent, eventually forming the ancestral lineages of indigenous peoples throughout the forests, plains, and river valleys. Mysteries still remain about certain population movements suggested by genetic signatures. For example, traces of ancestry related to ancient Southeast Asian populations appear in some indigenous groups in the Amazon.
How did this genetic influence reach such distant regions? Some researchers propose a coastal migration deep into South America, while others speculate about intermediate populations in Central America that have yet to be discovered archaeologically. Similar puzzles arise from evidence suggesting multiple population turnovers in North America over thousands of years, likely driven by climatic events, resource shifts, or social dynamics that compelled groups to migrate or adapt. The story of the first Americans is not merely one of movement, but of cultural transformation. Oral histories preserved by indigenous peoples across the continent speak of ancestral migrations, glacial landscapes, and encounters with now extinct animals. These stories, passed down through generations, often align in surprising ways with scientific reconstructions. Many tribes describe journeys along coastlines, land bridges, or great rivers, narratives that echo the archaeological understanding of early travel routes. The integration of indigenous knowledge into scientific research enriches the narrative, offering perspectives grounded in thousands of years of cultural memory. Increasingly, archaeologists collaborate with indigenous communities to interpret findings, recognizing that these voices are essential in understanding the full complexity of the migration story. One of the most significant developments has been the realization that Beringia was not a mere stepping stone, but a cultural crucible. The prolonged isolation of people within this region created unique genetic and cultural identities that later radiated across the Americas. The tools, artistic expressions, and survival strategies that emerged there formed the foundation upon which later traditions evolved. Even after populations expanded southward, patterns of movement, trade, and communication linked distant groups across vast territories. From the Arctic to Patagonia, subtle similarities in tool styles, hearth construction, and symbolic artifacts reveal deep-rooted connections traceable to Beringia. As the first Americans spread into different landscapes, they encountered challenges that demanded continual innovation. The shifting climate created cycles of abundance and scarcity. Glacial melt reshaped rivers and coastlines, sometimes cutting off established routes or exposing new opportunities. Forests expanded into formerly open plains, changing hunting strategies. Communities adapted by developing seasonal migration patterns, moving between coastal and inland regions or between river valleys and upland areas, depending on the time of year. These migrations formed networks of knowledge, information about resources, weather patterns, and safe pathways that was shared through stories, rituals, and education within each community. Another key aspect of the early American story is the emergence of symbolic behavior and artistic expression. In caves, rock shelters, and cliff faces, early inhabitants carved and painted images of animals, human figures, and abstract designs. These artworks provide glimpses into the spiritual world of the first Americans, reflecting beliefs about nature, ancestors, and the cosmos. Some images depict animals that no longer exist, offering clues about the environment and cultural importance of megafauna. Others portray scenes of hunting, ceremonies, or mythological beings. These artistic traditions, though varied across regions, highlight the cognitive depth and cultural richness of early societies. They also challenge the outdated notion that early hunter-gatherers led simple or monotonous lives. Instead, they were deeply connected to their landscapes, spiritually and intellectually engaged, and capable of sophisticated symbolic communication. As archaeological investigations push deeper into South America, even older timelines emerge. Sites in Brazil, dating tens of thousands of years earlier than expected, ignite debates about whether humans arrived far earlier than even the new models suggest. Although some of these claims remain controversial, they raise important questions about the speed and complexity of early migrations. Could there have been multiple waves of migration from different regions of Northeast Asia? Did earlier, now extinct populations leave behind subtle traces that await discovery? These unresolved questions keep the field dynamic, encouraging new methods and interdisciplinary cooperation among geologists, geneticists, linguists, and indigenous scholars. A major breakthrough in recent decades is the use of Bayesian modeling to construct more refined chronologies using radiocarbon dating. This statistical approach integrates multiple lines of evidence, archaeological layers, environmental markers, and genetic divergence dates to build more accurate timelines. Such models suggest that the first migrants may have entered Beringia between 25 and 30,000 years ago, remained isolated there for several thousand years, and then began a staggered expansion into the Americas around 16 to 20,000 years ago. These refined timelines align closely with paleo-environmental reconstructions showing when coastal routes became navigable and when inland corridors reached ecological viability. Yet the question remains, what motivated these early migrations? While environmental changes undoubtedly played a role, human decisions are never reducible to climate alone. Social factors such as population pressure, competition for resources, alliances between groups, and cultural traditions of exploration likely contributed to the ongoing dispersal. Humans are naturally curious, driven by the desire to see what lies beyond the horizon. The vast landscapes of the Americas, rich with unfamiliar plants, animals, and opportunities, must have offered a powerful incentive for exploration. For some groups, movement may have been a matter of survival. For others, it was a chance to expand social networks, establish new hunting grounds, or participate in rituals linked to travel and discovery.
The deeper scientists dive into the story of early migration, the more they realize how intertwined human trajectories are with the planet's shifting climate. The melting of the ice sheets, the rise of sea levels, and the transformation of habitats all shaped the paths available to humans. Coastal settlements that once lined the shores of Beringia are now hidden beneath the waves, waiting for underwater archaeologists to uncover their secrets. River systems that guided travelers across the continent have changed courses, burying artifacts beneath floodplains. Yet these landscape shifts also preserved extraordinary sites, caves sealed for millennia, lake beds that trapped pollen and seeds, and ancient soils that hold the footprints of children who played by the water's edge 15,000 years ago. Perhaps the most striking discovery in recent years is the presence of human footprints preserved in the White Sands region of New Mexico. Dated to over 20,000 years ago, these prints belong to adults and children walking across a muddy lakeshore during the late Ice Age. Their presence challenges every previous timeline and raises profound questions about how early people reached the interior of the continent so quickly. The footprints are not isolated. They form trails suggesting repeated use of the area. Here, captured in the ground itself, is a moment in time, a family or group moving across a landscape where giant sloths and mammoths roamed. These imprints serve as a human signature far older than any Clovis point, a physical testament to the presence of people deep inside the Americas at a time long before traditional theories allowed. As new evidence floods in, researchers recognize that the peopling of the Americas was a complex, multi-layered process. No single migration, no single culture, and no single route can explain the diversity found across the continents. Instead, the story resembles a braided river, multiple streams flowing from a common source, diverging, merging, and reshaping the land through which they pass. Beringia stands at the headwaters of this river, not as a simple bridge, but as the birthplace of new cultural identities, forging connections that spread across thousands of miles and thousands of years. The final pieces of this sweeping narrative emerge from the deepening study of linguistics. The diversity of indigenous languages, from the Arctic to Patagonia, reflects thousands of years of separation, adaptation, and cultural evolution. Some language families appear to share distant roots traceable to ancient Siberian groups, while others bear unique features found nowhere else on Earth. This linguistic diversity supports the idea of early, rapid expansions followed by prolonged regional isolation. It reveals the vastness of human creativity as people shaped words to describe new environments, new animals, and new beliefs. Language, like DNA and stone tools, becomes another line of evidence in the reconstruction of ancient histories. As understanding grows, so too does the recognition of responsibility. Archaeologists and geneticists increasingly acknowledge the importance of working collaboratively with indigenous communities whose ancestors are central to this story.
respect for cultural heritage, consultation regarding ancient remains, and inclusion of indigenous scholars are critical components of ethical research. This shift not only ensures that scientific investigations proceed responsibly, but also enriches research with perspectives grounded in cultural continuity and traditional knowledge. In many ways, the emerging story of the first Americans is not merely a scientific revelation, it is a restoration. It restores to indigenous peoples the depth and antiquity of their presence in the Americas, reaffirming that they have inhabited these lands far longer than once acknowledged by Western scholarship. It restores complexity to migration patterns, replacing outdated theories with narratives that reflect human adaptability, resilience, and ingenuity. And it restores balance to the partnership between science and cultural memory, showing that both have essential roles in unraveling the truth of humanity's past.
While archaeological and genetic breakthroughs have greatly advanced our understanding of the first inhabitants of the Americas, the story does not end with the initial migrations from Beringia. Instead, the subsequent chapters of human presence on these continents reveal a sweeping saga of cultural development, environmental mastery, technological innovation, and societal transformation. Once the earliest settlers dispersed across North and South America, they began shaping landscapes, ecosystems, and civilizations in ways that continue to influence the world today. The diverse indigenous societies that emerged reflect deep connections to their environments and millennia of adaptation. These communities built complex cultural traditions, spiritual systems, social structures, and technologies that transformed the continents into vibrant mosaics of human achievement. The origins of this vast cultural diversity, however, remain rooted in the formative experiences of the first migrants who crossed the Beringian landscape. As populations spread across unfamiliar territories, environmental knowledge became the cornerstone of survival. The early inhabitants of the Arctic, for example, developed sophisticated methods of hunting sea mammals and navigating icy waters. Their techniques for building insulated dwellings, crafting waterproof clothing from animal skins, and constructing lightweight boats such as kayaks demonstrate a high level of ingenuity. Farther south, communities in the forests of eastern North America learned to exploit seasonal cycles, adapting to environments filled with hardwood trees, rivers teeming with fish, and dense undergrowth. Hunting strategies evolved to match the prey species available, and plant knowledge expanded to incorporate a wide array of medicinal and nutritional resources. In the desert regions, where massive herds of bison roamed, groups developed tools and communal hunting practices that allowed efficient and sustainable harvesting of these animals. Across desert regions, inhabitants mastered the art of water management, using techniques such as canal building and seasonal migration to overcome harsh climates. These adaptations did not occur in isolation. Over thousands of years, networks of communication and trade spread across the Americas. Evidence from archaeological sites reveal items such as obsidian, shells, pigments, and ceremonial artifacts traveling vast distances, sometimes hundreds or even thousands of miles from their places of origin. Such exchanges indicate not only economic interactions, but also the sharing of ideas, rituals, and artistic traditions. These networks contributed to the rise of early agricultural practices in several regions. In present-day Mexico, the domestication of maize marked a turning point in human history. What began as a modest grass called teosinte gradually evolved into the maize varieties that would become essential to civilizations across the continents. Similarly, squash, beans, potatoes, and quinoa emerged as staple crops in different ecological zones, fueling population growth and leading to the formation of settled communities.
The earliest agricultural societies paved the way for the development of complex civilizations such as the Maya, the Inca, the Mississippians, and the many intricate cultures of the Pacific Northwest. But these later achievements cannot be separated from the foundational experiences of the first inhabitants.
The knowledge of animal behavior, seasonal cycles, and environmental rhythms that the earliest migrants carried with them shaped the agricultural innovations that followed. More importantly, the philosophical and spiritual frameworks that emerged from a deep relationship with the land became central to indigenous worldviews. Many indigenous traditions express a profound sense of kinship with the environment, a belief that mountains, rivers, animals, and plants possess their own spirits or life forces. These cosmologies reflect millennia of lived experience in which survival depended on understanding and respecting natural systems. At the same time, linguistic diversity across the Americas reveals the long evolutionary journey of human societies. With more than 1,000 languages spoken before European contact, the continents showcase the expansive cultural differentiation that unfolded over tens of thousands of years. Linguists trace certain families back to early divergence events, mapping population movements and periods of isolation that align remarkably with genetic and archaeological evidence. For instance, the Nodine language family found in parts of Alaska, Canada, and the southwestern United States appears to reflect a later migration pulse from Siberia, distinct from the earlier Beringian populations. This suggests that Beringia served as a migration corridor not just once, but multiple times, with different groups contributing layers to the cultural and genetic tapestry of the Americas. Some of the most compelling clues about early societies come from burial practices and ceremonial structures. In many parts of the Americas, early inhabitants left behind elaborate burial sites, indicating belief systems centered on ancestors, cosmology, and the afterlife. Red ochre, a pigment with symbolic importance, frequently appears in early burials. Its use reflects a shared spiritual tradition, possibly rooted in ancient Beringian practices. Similarly, the construction of mounds in eastern North America, some dating back thousands of years before the rise of major civilizations, points toward communal ritual activity. These sites, often aligned with astronomical events, suggest a sophisticated understanding of celestial cycles. In the Andes, early ceremonial centers reveal complex ritual landscapes where people gathered for festivals, rites of passage, and political negotiations. Such structures were not merely places of worship. They served as nodes of social cohesion, reinforcing alliances and shared identities among diverse groups. Although much has been learned, significant gaps still remain in the historical record. Many early settlements lie beneath coastlines submerged after the end of the Ice Age, making them difficult to locate and excavate. Rising sea levels flooded vast swaths of what were once habitable lands, including parts of Beringia itself. This hidden archaeological frontier is one of the most promising yet challenging areas of research. Underwater exploration technologies such as sonar mapping, sediment coring, and remotely operated vehicles offer new possibilities for uncovering submerged sites. Early results from such explorations have revealed ancient river channels, freshwater springs, and areas likely once occupied by humans. Each discovery brings scientists closer to understanding how the earliest migrants lived, traveled, and interacted with their environments.
The importance of collaboration with indigenous communities cannot be overstated. Many indigenous nations maintain oral histories recounting journeys across landscapes shaped by ice, movement along coastlines, and encounters with giant animals. These stories often parallel scientific findings, offering complementary perspectives rooted in cultural experience rather than material evidence. In some cases, indigenous oral histories contain details that guide researchers to potential archaeological sites or help interpret the meaning of particular artifacts. This partnership represents a more holistic approach to understanding human history, one that acknowledges the value of knowledge systems developed over thousands of years. Modern scientific tools also continue to refine the timeline of early human presence. Carbon dating has become more precise, and new techniques allow the dating of materials once considered impossible to analyze. Luminescence dating measures the last time minerals were exposed to sunlight, offering insights into ancient human activities preserved in sediments. Proteomic analysis of ancient tools provides information about the species of animals processed by early peoples, revealing dietary habits and hunting strategies.
Meanwhile, advancements in ancient DNA recovery allow researchers to extract genetic material from tiny bone fragments or even soil samples. These breakthroughs are unlocking stories of individual lives, what people ate, how they traveled, and how different groups interacted. One of the most transformative insights from genetic research concerns the so-called Beringian standstill. Genetic data indicates that the ancestors of Native Americans diverged from their Eurasian relatives earlier than previously assumed, suggesting a long period of isolation. During this time, the Beringian population developed unique genetic characteristics that were later carried into the Americas. This isolation may have lasted several thousand years, during which environmental and climatic conditions shaped the social and biological landscape of the early inhabitants. The standstill period would have allowed distinct cultural traditions to evolve as well, potentially explaining similarities seen in early American tool traditions and symbolic artifacts found across distant regions. As Beringia warmed and ecological corridors opened, multiple waves of migration likely followed. Some groups traveled along the Pacific coast, eventually populating Central and South America with astonishing speed. Others moved inland once the ice-free corridor became viable. Later migrations brought new cultural and linguistic influences into the northern regions. These layered migrations demonstrate that the peopling of the Americas was not a single event, but a long, dynamic process with multiple contributors. Each group added to the richness of the human story on these continents. The question of how far back human presence in the Americas extends remains open and controversial. While most evidence supports a timeline of occupation beginning between 16 and 20,000 years ago, some researchers argue for far earlier dates. Sites in Brazil, South Carolina, and even parts of Mexico have produced artifacts and features that some scholars interpret as signs of human activity tens of thousands of years earlier than widely accepted. These claims spark intense debate, as extraordinary conclusions require extraordinary evidence. Yet the possibility of deeper human antiquity in the Americas invites researchers to keep questioning assumptions and pursuing new lines of inquiry.
Climate change plays a central role in this exploration, both in the past and today. The melting of Ice Age glaciers not only shaped migration routes, but also preserved artifacts within layers of ice that are now thawing. In regions such as the Yukon and Alaska, melting ice patches have revealed exceptionally preserved hunting tools, fragments of clothing, and even footprints. These discoveries offer rare glimpses into the daily lives of early Arctic inhabitants and provide further evidence of the intricate relationship between humans and their environments. However, the rapid pace of modern climate change threatens many archaeological sites, exposing them to erosion and decay. This creates a sense of urgency among researchers to document and preserve these ancient stories before they are lost forever. Ultimately, the story of the first Americans is not a simple tale of migration from one continent to another. It is a story of endurance and adaptation across millennia, beginning in the harsh landscapes of Beringia and unfolding across two vast continents filled with ecological diversity. It is a story of communities forging deep connections with their environments, developing technologies and traditions that reflected their understanding of the world. It is a story of diversity, creativity, and resilience, qualities that remain central to indigenous cultures today. The new evidence emerging from genetics, archaeology, paleoenvironmental studies, and indigenous knowledge systems transforms our understanding of what it means to be the first inhabitants of the Americas. It reveals a past that is richer and more complex than previously imagined, a past shaped by multiple waves of migration, by cultural innovation, and by the ceaseless interplay between humans and the natural world. This new understanding does not diminish the significance of earlier theories, but builds upon them, integrating old insights with new discoveries to form a more complete picture. The vanished landscapes of Beringia, once buried beneath the sea, now rise again in scientific awareness,
revealing themselves not as mere footpaths, but as dynamic homelands where the ancestors of Native American peoples lived, loved, created, and dreamed. Their legacy endures in the languages spoken across the continents, in the cultural traditions passed down through generations, and in the genetic threads woven through millions of people today. The story of Beringia is the story of human possibility, a reminder that even in the face of immense climatic challenges, people found ways to adapt, explore, and flourish. As research continues and new technologies emerge, more discoveries undoubtedly await. Underwater sites may one day reveal early settlements along the Beringian coast. Deeper excavations in South America may uncover new layers of human antiquity. Genetic studies may trace unknown migration pulses or illuminate connections between distant populations. Each new finding will bring us closer to understanding the epic journey that brought humanity to the last great landmass on Earth.
The future of this field lies not only in technological progress, but in fostering respectful partnerships with indigenous communities whose histories and identities are deeply entwined with these ancient migrations. Their knowledge enriches the scientific narrative and grounds it in lived experience. Together, these collaborative efforts can continue to unravel the mysteries of the past while honoring the people whose ancestors shaped the Americas long before written history began. In the end, the story of the first Americans is not merely about origins. It is about continuity, the enduring presence of indigenous peoples who trace their heritage back to the earliest days of human settlement. Their survival, cultural richness, and ongoing contributions to global knowledge stand as powerful evidence of the resilience that defined their ancestors' journey from Beringia. The land bridge may have vanished beneath the waves, but its legacy endures in every story, every tradition, and every community across the two continents. The narrative of America's first inhabitants continues to unfold, a testament to humanity's capacity for exploration, innovation, and adaptation. It is a story still being written, with each new discovery adding depth, nuance, and wonder to one of the greatest migrations our species has ever undertaken.